We are Rogue Media Sports.
It is Matt Mosley. It is a special edition of the Doomsday Podcast. It's a preview that we're doing on the Houston Texans. And Ed Werder from his Colorado studio. I'm in Dallas at the Frito Nation Productions, and we are pleased to be joined by a guy we've both known for a pretty good while now, and it is Brian Gaine, the general manager of the Houston Texans. It just happens to be the Cowboys' opponent on Sunday night. And Brian, welcome to the Doomsday Podcast. I know you're familiar with it. I don't know if you have time to sit around and listen to podcasts. You probably don't, but we are excited for you that you are the GM there, and have spent a lot of time working toward that. And now you're the man. You're. It's like it's on you. And is it just what's it been like so far? And I know you guys are 1-3, but it does seem like at least last week and even the week before, you're showing signs of heading in the right direction.
Well, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me. So, for us, it's been singular purpose. It's on to the next one. We had a good win in Indianapolis. It was our first win. It was a division win. It was on the road in a hostile environment. We felt like we made some of the corrections we needed to make. It became a very competitive game. It was also an overtime game. So we learned a lot about our team. And one thing our team will do is, if we're going to fight, we're going to play 4 quarters. The defense played 97 snaps that game, which was an interesting number because the fifth quarter or the overtime went the full distance. So, recovery and getting our guys ready to play this week were critical parts of our plan. But the job has been great. I've been doing this job, the personnel stuff for 20 plus years. I really reflect on my years in Dallas positively. They were, positive years, very influential in my development. So, that's one of the reasons probably why I am here where I am today, based on what I learned and the experiences I had at Valley Ranch.
Well, I think it's quite an achievement that you've finally gotten the general manager's job that you've coveted in the NFL and worked toward for a long period of time. And you've done so well enough to merit your own special edition podcast. I know going into that game you spoke about with the Colts that you'd been kind of frustrated by the fact that you'd been close, you'd been in a lot of one-score games, you'd been in the red zone a lot, and in both cases there was sort of a failure to finish that was the common denominator in your early season struggles. To what extent do you think you've resolved both of those issues in this game?
You learn through your success, and I think you learn through your failures. And, the first 3 games that we played, we lost by 1 score touchdown versus the Patriots. And we started the game terribly by, fumbling the ball on the first drive on our own 20. Our second game, we lost by 3 points to the Titans on the road, and then, losing by 5 points here in our home opener to the Giants. We just weren't finishing games. And when you reflect and look at some of the statistical things that occur or moments in the games where, 3 or 4 plays in one game can be the deciding factor. We just weren't finishing drives, weren't finishing contests. And a lot of that, points back to the red zone. We were at one point, I think, 5th or 6th in the league in red zone attempts, but we were near the bottom in terms of turning those into touchdowns. So we were getting at bats to win the games. We just weren't finishing the way that we wanted to. And then equally on defense. So we felt like that's been a point of emphasis for us to shore up here that, we're moving the ball on offense. We just weren't finishing. And we were a lot better at that in Indianapolis last week.
And Brian, one of the things when you talk about the defense being out there for a long time, at various points in the season, Jadeveon Clowney just came off and was named, I believe, the AFC Defensive Player of the Week. He had a big game, a couple of forced fumbles. You have maybe 2 of the greatest pass rushers in the game. The issue has been getting them on the field at the same time, and it's well documented. J.J. Watt, one of the great defensive players we've seen in this league, but he's had injuries last couple of years. Are you getting to the point, and I know you want to knock on wood when we even bring any of this up, but where you think you might have both guys kind of ready to finally be out there peaking at the same time?
Well, it's great to have them both healthy and playing a lot of major snaps. But, the way that we look at it is, look, both of those players are guys that opponents have to account for. They've been very active, very disruptive, and they play off of each other. The other thing, too, is these guys, they play hard and they chase the football. Like, if people see the sacks, they think about the rush. But both of these guys are very good in the running game. And perhaps that's not the area that gets a lot of the wow factor or the attention, but they're two-way players. And for us, like that's a very big part because we want to win on the early downs to position ourselves to get after the passer on third down. We also have Whitney Merciless. When we think about our pass rush, we feel like we have three guys that are contributing members to that rush, but we're working on trying to improve other areas of the defense as well. But right now, we feel like our front seven is a strength of ours.
Well, and to Matt's point about Clowney winning Player of the Week, J.J. Watt was just named the Defensive Player of the Month. And if you look at the game he just played against the Colts, they each had 2 sacks. Watt caused 2 fumbles. Clowney scored a touchdown, recovering a fumble in the end zone. So it does seem like the strength of your team is kind of coming together again, and that's vital. You mentioned everybody thinks about him as pass rushers, but against the Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott, you got to be prepared to stop the run because he leads the league, and we saw what he can do in both phases of the game last week. What kind of priority is controlling Elliott in your game plan?
Yeah, first and foremost, Ezekiel Elliott, tons of respect for him. Top 5 back in the league, arguably one of the better running backs in the NFL right now, leading the league in rushing. We're certainly aware of that. He's a multi-dimensional player. I think back to what we thought about him in the draft and kind of how he's become that player here in the league. He is what you would call a 3-down back, and he can do it all. He can rush inside. He can rush outside. He can play with power. He has enough speed to threaten the perimeter. He can get chunk yard production. He can make explosive plays. And perhaps, you saw that last week, maybe he doesn't get enough credit in the passing game. So he's a guy every down that you have to account for. And we're going to need to play our best on defense to try to control that. You may not stop him, but at least if you can try to make an effort to control him. It takes 11 guys to stop Ezekiel Elliott. But, just to go back a little bit on JJ and Clowney and some of the work that they're doing this year. If you saw how well these guys work Wednesday to Saturday, really Monday to Friday, getting their bodies ready to play and focusing on the game plan and getting ready to play Sunday, you probably know why their production is at the levels it is on Sundays. So it's a credit to both of those guys to do the rehab that they had to do to make it back out there for the season. So we're excited about the future here in the coming weeks to see what these guys can do together when they're on the field together.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you've had to do, Brian. I mean, you talk about, trial by fire. You've spent a lot of time over the years having to go out and scout and bring in guys to try to create depth, and what you've seen in that secondary this year. I want to get in a minute to DeShaun Watson, but just your secondary, that is you didn't get to pick this year, for people that don't remember that, till the 3rd round, because obviously of some decisions that were made earlier and that went into getting DeShaun Watson. Y'all didn't go till the 3rd round, and you pick up a safety, Justin Reed, who has had to step in, and I don't know, last thing I saw, he was playing about 70% of the snaps. You also brought in Kayvon Webster, veteran, Sharice Wright, veteran. Those guys are all like having to be almost every down players now. How difficult has that been to just try to keep churning that out with the secondary? I mean, it's not like you guys haven't had some injury issues in the past, but that does seem like it's been a bit of a problem area for you guys.
Yeah, so that's a fair assessment. But what I would tell you is, from the personnel end of things, we're constantly contingency planning, and when you build your roster at the 53-man cutdown, you're not just building it for the immediacy of that week or the week thereafter. You're trying to build it so it could stand the test of time for 17 weeks. The importance of that is try to build as good a depth as you can, but also try to develop depth through the season. So when and if the bell rings and you have to bring a guy along to fill in a spot when that time comes, that you have what I would call an internal solution. So reflecting on the corner group, we went through a difficult circumstance here, losing Kevin Johnson and then dealing with Aaron Coleman's injury. Like, we had to have some contingency plans. So somebody I was familiar with being in Buffalo for the year was Sharice Wright. I knew what his makeup was. I knew what his physical skill set was. He was available at the time when we had Kevin Johnson's injury. So that's a process that we go through every day, every week. We're always updating our ready lists, always updating our short lists and who are the guys that are out there when that bell rings. And then we signed Kayvon Webster in August. He was coming off an Achilles injury. And for us, we knew we probably had to finish out his rehab on the back end of it. But we felt like perhaps we would get that dividend at some point in the early part of the season. Well, that time has come. And that's what you're always doing on the personnel side of things. You're always trying to build that depth for when and if a rainy day comes. And now that bell has rung, and then both of those guys are carving out contributing roles for us.
Well, speaking of depth, and you're being tested in that regard, maybe on the offensive line more than any other part of your team. You lost your starting right tackle in the opener, and if you have reason for alarm, I think going into this game, it would be based on the fact that DeShaun Watson's been sacked 17 times, and only Buffalo's allowed their quarterback to be sacked more often. Obviously, the Cowboys third in the NFL in sacks. DeMarcus Lawrence leads the league in sacks, and they've got David Irving eligible to come off suspension this week. How concerned are you about that matchup, or how pivotal do you think that'll be in determining the outcome of the game?
I think any team that plays the Cowboys would be concerned with that. Certainly aware of the statistical numbers. Some of those sacks, perhaps they were legitimate sacks, in terms of the protection, but all of the other ones, some of them could have been on the quarterback, other ones could have been on the backs or the tight ends, some of it could have been on communication. But nevertheless, we know we have to improve in that area. But when you're playing the Cowboys, like the strength of their team, obviously, is the running back, the O-line, the quarterback. But when you think about their team, like the front seven is a handful. They are a very talented team in the front seven. They got height and length at corner. I mean, they can stress the quarterback. They can stress the pocket. They have talented blue chip players in that front seven. So we're certainly aware of that. And they're athletic at linebacker. They can really move and run and cover. So we got our hands full this week, and we're going to have to play our best, and certainly aware of DeMarcus Lawrence. And we're going to work hard here to shore protection and improve each week. And I thought last week it did get better despite the numbers. But nevertheless, it's something that we're aware of, and we're going to have to help the quarterback in that capacity.
With DeShaun Watson, your quarterback, he goes through this unbelievable 7-week stretch before the injury took him out. And what happens is everybody, of course, expects, well, he's going to pick up right where he left off, and he certainly has put up good numbers. He's had one issue that really comes to mind at the end of a game, just a decision-making thing, and it's maybe not all on him. But what have you seen from DeShaun? I mean, that's got to be a tough load is, okay, the reason you have these expectations because he performed so admirably last year, and then at the same time he's still making sure he's comfortable, playing on that knee, and then he gets going this year. What have you seen from him, both as a leader and tangible wise, and then his just ability on the field?
The one thing I would want to point to is, look, this is his second season, but for all intents and purposes, he has not played a full 16-game season yet. I think he started, 8 or 9 games now in terms of his overall NFL career, but he's coming off a significant injury. Yeah, and I don't know if it's 10 months out right now from his ACL, but nevertheless, like that takes a lot of time to rebound from such an injury. But if you ever were going to point to somebody on how to handle the recovery and your rehabilitation phase of an injury, it would be DeShaun Watson. So I always tell young players, like, if you want to learn how to get back on the field and work, just watch how he did it. The second part of that was, although he was coming off the ACL, like he did have time with his receivers, his tight ends, and the backs through the OTA and minicamp in terms of building chemistry on the field. Communication, silent communication, coordination, hand signals, all those kind of things that are important when you're working with your receiving group from the quarterback position. So he didn't come into training camp, empty from that experience, which was a positive. But he's still a young player with a ton of physical upside. And when people ask me about him, I often say you can see the physical talent. You can see the arm strength. You can see his mobility, his athleticism. But some of it's the in-between stuff that people may not see. It's the poise, it's the presence, it's the leadership, both vocal and by example, and it's his the way he is around his teammates. There's a general calmness that the players trust that this guy can make a play for them when the time comes. And if you watch the end of the Indy game, when he had to make a critical throw to position us to kick the game-winning field goal in overtime, that's a perfect example of the type of quarterback that he can be.
Well, obviously, you're one of the most explosive offenses in the league, and people may not think of the Texans in that regard, but DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers of any kind in the entire league. And then Will Fuller seems to play exceptionally well when he's out there with DeShaun. And now you've unveiled a young guy named Kiki Kuti. Is that right?
That is correct.
And he was sort of the focal point last week. 15 targets, 11 catches, 109 yards. How strong do you think this receiving group is right now?
It's what I would call a quarterback-friendly receiving group. And then one point of emphasis when we got here in January and we kind of set the table and the template of what we wanted to do for our offense was to put as many weapons around our young quarterback to help him achieve his production. And for us, when we got here, Hopkins was already here and Will Fuller was already here, and they complement each other very well in that regard. But we wanted to amp up what I would call the inside passing game presence. So we wanted to find somebody who could be an inside-outside player. So we like Kuti in the draft. So he presents that element for us. But also we drafted 2 young tight ends. And faced with the unfortunate circumstance for C.J. Fedorowicz, who had to retire, we had to address the tight end position this offseason as well. And we didn't draft just 1, but we had 2. Drafted the Akins kid from Central Florida and Jordan Thomas from Mississippi State. And both young tight ends have contributed for us. But Kuti made it back this week and played versus the Colts. He had 11 catches for 100-plus yards, but it was his ability after the catch. And I would also say that he probably left 3 or 4 plays on the field. He could have been even more productive. We would have had more X plays if those plays were made. So that's the challenge for him this week is to get better. So we have a young group of receivers. Will Fuller's only in his 3rd year. Kuti is a rookie. We have these 2 young tight ends paired with our veteran Ryan Griffin. And then DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins isn't right now in the prime of his career, so we feel like the future is bright as it relates to our skilled players in the passing game.
I'd try and take credit for Hopkins, even if you didn't draft him, just going forward sort of on a personal note.
Oh, yeah. I don't blame you for doing that.
You should take credit for him.
Yeah, he's a quarterback-friendly player, and he's got great ball skills. He's got excellent hands. He can track it well. He can play outside. He can play inside. He's an exciting player to watch.
And amazingly productive. Even, to me, the most remarkable thing about him is how remarkably productive he was when the Texans really didn't have a steady quarterback situation. And it didn't matter who he was playing with. He put up phenomenal numbers with everybody.
If you don't know him or if you've never physically stood next to him, he is a bigger person. Like when you stand next to him, like you don't realize it sometimes. Like he is all 6'2". He is all of 210, 215 pounds, big hands, very athletic body type. So sometimes I don't think he gets enough credit for the size and the strength that he actually plays with.
Based on a term you just used, I would, and I don't want you to comment on this. This is a Mosley editorial comment. I would say the Cowboys have a quarterback unfriendly receiving group. But that's just.
Don't.
Oh, you don't.
He's
Okay.
Gonna hang up.
Hey, I am curious when you were. I'm trying to think when Dak. Were you? That may have been your time in Buffalo. I'm trying to think exactly where you were. But Dak's coming out in the draft. Do you remember taking a long look at him or studying Dak Prescott and kind of what you thought? It's funny how this works. You know how it is in scouting, and you've always, from what I can tell, have been pretty upfront about the guys you like or don't, or maybe aren't as high on. But a lot of people after Dak had that success suddenly jumped out there and were like, "Oh yeah, I loved him. I loved him the whole time." And you know how that goes in scouting. What was your
Sure.
what do you remember thinking about Dak Prescott when he was coming out of Mississippi State?
Aside from the physical profile, good-looking athlete, had size, body type, play strength. He was highly productive. He was a winner. He ran their offense very well. He knew their offense very well. A very instinctive football player. Very good with the ball in his hand. He was a dual threat. Highly regarded in the Mississippi State program. The coaches thought very highly of him there. He could learn and process information. His work ethic was outstanding. The intangible profile were all pluses. And he looked now that he's in the NFL and you're playing against him, he poses a dual threat to the defense. The ability to extend plays, play outside the pocket. He does have arm talent. He can make plays with his legs. He can get first downs with his legs. So on third down, they're very difficult to defend because he poses the two-way threat to pass or run. And, not surprised that he's had the level of success that he's had.
Should we talk yet about your journey and what it took for you to get to the position you're in?
Absolutely.
And maybe get your favorite memory of working in Dallas in the personnel department with Bill Parcells and the influence he's had on your career? What's your favorite memory or what story when you go out on the raising ticket sales for the Texans and you tell a Bill Parcells story? What's your headliner?
Wow. Well, there's so many. I say with great humility. I had the great fortune of having a year or at least a training camp of playing under Coach Parcells of the Jets in 1997. I was cut and I bounced around the league for a few years, and then I got my first job in scouting with Coach Parcells of the Jets in 1999. And the best way for me to describe it is, the things that I learned under Coach were probably things you don't learn in a manual or you don't buy and read out of a book. So I'm greatly indebted to him for where I am in my career. But, that's where it started, 1999. My scouting career started in 99 with the Jets. He hired me as an entry-level scouting assistant. I spent 7 years there with him. And then when he moved on to Dallas, I came to the Cowboys a year later and worked under Jeff Ireland. And when I got there, they were coming off, I think, the 6-10 season. And for the 3 years that we were there, I left that year that we were 13-3, and went to Miami. When Bill went to Miami, I had a chance to grow more, take on a new role, and go to the Dolphins. So for 7 or 8 years of my career, I worked under Bill. But there's a few stories I think about. The one that I don't know if you guys ever heard of was, we were doing pretty good at the Cowboys at the time, and we were winning. But although Bill was a Hall of Fame coach, he was a Hall of Fame motivator, and he was a master at messaging. And I remember coming off a real big win, walking through the locker room, and there was mouse traps hanging from the rafters in the locker room. And I'm walking through there. I'm wondering why the mouse traps are dangling from the ceiling. And Coach Parcells' famous quote was, "Don't take the cheese." He wanted the guys to see the mouse traps and for a moment of symbolism saying, like, everyone's going to tell you how great you are and how well you're doing. We got another game to play this week. So he was a master at motivating people as it relates to that. So those are the kind of lessons that you just don't learn in a manual or a book. But, there's numerous ones, but that's the one that comes to mind in Dallas that stood out the most.
I remember him saying one time after they won a game, but it wasn't nearly good enough, that he said, "If we think that's good enough, we're flying a burning plane."
And it was the one-liners as well. It was the ability to deliver the messaging in a way using symbolism. But it was that Northeast humor, with the one-liners mixed through it that I guess, me being from that area as well, like I really appreciated those.
What do you think he saw in you as a player that led him to offer you a job later as in the scouting department?
Oh, I don't know. I wasn't very good, and you could probably say NFL and player very loosely when you're talking about Brian Gaine. But one thing I did was I was also a long snapper, and I was a tight end long snapper, so I was competing for the back end roster spot. Yeah. So tight end long snapper with emphasis on long snapping. So that gave me a chance to kind of compete at least for some versatile roles. on the team. But, perhaps maybe it was more my approach than ability, try hard, overachieve, work hard, grind, try to squeeze every amount of talent out of what the Lord above had blessed me with. But, perhaps, I wanted to be in football either way. I wanted to maximize and exhaust whatever playing career that I could chase. And if that wasn't going to be good enough, I wanted to pursue and play a small part in trying to build a championship winner in the NFL. So at a very young age, I knew I wanted to try to be in the league from like a scouting or coaching standpoint as it related to my teen years, my formidable years through college. So I was, greatly indebted to Coach Parcells to be given that opportunity.
I think you could have been like the lankiest long snapper, deep snapper ever. I mean, I'm trying to think, were you the same size you are now back then? I mean, I guess you had a little more weight.
I often say that's about 50 pounds ago. And unfortunately, my body has gone in the other direction. It hasn't gone in the positive direction.
You're a pretty thin guy. Now, I will say, last thing I was going to ask you about is it's the you sort of came up and you learned under Parcells and all these guys, Ireland, whoever else. I mean, you were a grinder. How is that? Are you still? I mean, to me, you strike me as someone still dying to get out on the road and do all the things you did as a scout, but you have to balance that with you're the guy who has to delegate everything, and you're the huge decision maker. You obviously work hand in hand with Bill O'Brien there. Is that tough to manage when part of you is always saying, I need to be out on the road, I need to be out on the road?
That's one of the number one challenges, I think, when you're in a personnel director's role, scouting director role, or an executive scouting position. When you come into the general manager role, is that delicate balance between running a football operation, directing a football operation, and still being what I would call an executive scout, still putting your eyes on players and seeing players. So it takes time management, takes careful planning, takes very good communication with your coaching staff, your head coach, takes very good communication with your scouting staff, so that you're still here and have a pulse of the team and have a pulse of the week, but still with an eye towards April 27th, April 28th, and trying to replace that pipeline. We can watch a lot of film here in the office nowadays with your iPads, with your coordination with your video department, but I still believe to a degree you have to be able to put your eyes on the prospects to physically see what they look like, to physically see how they move around in practice, and you can watch the tape, but I think it's still a projection business, and you have to be able to see what these guys are today and what they can be tomorrow. Look, scouting is a process. It's not, I'm not just going out in September. I mean, we do this now from September to January. So it's a methodical window here. It's not like I'm trying to squeeze everything into September to see every prospect. It just takes some careful planning of when you can be in the office and when you can be out of the office.
All right. Well, go ahead, Ed.
Matt, I think you should ask him your question. You made an interesting observation.
Oh.
In our production meeting before the call.
Is that what that is? A production meeting? I didn't know that.
Well, we're going to pretend I'm in a studio in Colorado. Why not pretend?
I missed that meeting.
Yeah, you missed the meeting. That was by design, by the way. But you made the point that the guy who's the sensation of the NFL this year, Patrick Mahomes, was taken with the 10th pick in the draft 2 years ago, and it was in that same draft 2 spots later. That Brian and Bill O'Brien and the Texans drafted their quarterback, DeShaun Watson. I'm just wondering, at that time, how did you evaluate those 2 players, and with what degree of fascination do you watch what Mahomes is doing now?
I've watched from afar because they haven't been on any of our scheduling or haven't been on any of our crossovers. We had a chance to play them in the preseason, but, at that stage it was preseason game 1. I just had a chance to see him in pregame. But, look, both of these guys are young, physically talented players at the position with a lot of upside, with high ceilings. And it's been fun to watch these guys develop here in year 2 of their career. DeShaun had to play it naturally last year, coming off the injury. Mahomes didn't play last year. And perhaps that 1 year on the bench learning behind Smith and the 1 year in Andy's program, perhaps you're seeing the dividend now of what that learning allowed him to do. But, look, both were first-round worthy players, and both were certain in the conversation. But for us at that time, we're excited as heck that we had an opportunity to get DeShaun. The one thing about both of those players I recall was, a term we use in scouting is, how guys are wired. Both of these guys were wired right. The intangible profile was very good on both prospects. And quite frankly, the physical profile, you see it from both guys. You see the arm talent. You see their athleticism. You see their movement skills. It's the leadership. It's the intangible profile that is a little harder to decipher when you're just watching games on TV. And both of these guys offer that profile in pluses. And, I see it every day here with DeShaun, and I'm sure KC sees that as well in terms of the leadership, the presence, the poise, the work ethic, the football character. And that's the part that we spend a lot of time researching on prospects. And both of these guys, our guy, DeShaun, and Kansas City's and Mahomes, both of those guys were graded very high in that area. Not surprised by either success.
How about another guy I think would grade high in all of those areas who's having an enormously successful early portion of the season is Mike Vrabel, who's off to a 3-1 start in his first head coaching job at Tennessee. He was your defensive coordinator. Prior to that, he's beaten the Eagles and the Jaguars. How frustrating is it to lose your defensive coordinator to a team in your division?
Mike is no surprise. Mike is going to be an outstanding head coach. He's a very good leader, defensive-minded head coach. I can see the personality of that team coming from the way Mike approaches the game. So I'm not surprised by Mike's early success. Naturally, yes, it's in the division, and they're a direct competitor of ours. But there's friendships here, and then unfortunately, we have to play him now twice a year.
Right.
And I think Mike was deserving of a head coaching opportunity. I know it's Tennessee, it's within the AFC South, but I was happy to see him get an opportunity. And look, they're going to be a formidable foe. They're a playoff team last year. They're off to a good start this year. They're creating a home field advantage. They're playing well right now. So this division has gotten a whole lot stronger from when I was here prior, from when the 3 years I was here, from 15, 16, and 17. The division has drastically changed with Jacksonville being the AFC champion now, Tennessee being a playoff caliber team now. Andrew Luck now is back and playing with the Colts. We faced him last week, playing at a high level. So the division has drastically changed, and we're going to have to play our best football here to be in this thing in December.
Well, listen, we so much appreciate your time and always pull for you from afar, and I'll hopefully duck in Sunday night, and you'll want to introduce me to Bob McNair and take me around the suite there, Brian. I know that'll be part of your priorities on Sunday night. But hey, best of luck to you, and we really, really appreciate it.
And I just want to say one final thing too, is that I know Bill O'Brien, the head coach of the Texans, pretty well. I know one of the reasons that he felt good about signing that extension after last season for 4 more years with the Texans was because he feels so good about having Brian Gaine as his partner building the football team. I think that's essential to success in the NFL, and that's a credit to you, Brian, that Bill feels so strongly about what you can add.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. Philosophical alignment is one of the critical components, I think, to any football organization's success, and that's the first thing that Bill and I hit it off on, is just our philosophical belief system of how we want to build football program, football culture, how we want to build a roster. All those things are very important to us, and in that regard, we're philosophically aligned, and perhaps that gives us a chance to have success.
All right, Brian, best of luck on Sunday night, and we'll do another 45 minutes on Monday morning.
Very good.
Thank you very much. You can show Mosley some of your long snapping skills in the suite. That's
right. I'd like
It'll
to see.
be one-handed though, because my left shoulder's no good anymore.
Oh no, he's breaking down.
Snap the ball.
That's right. And that was our conversation with Brian Gaine of the of the Houston Texans. And Ed, really good stuff. We've watched his career, and Brian's one of those guys that you've seen GMs come up or guys that are aspiring to be GMs and play the game and try to know all the right people and have the right agent. He never really did that. He kind of was a grinder, and that's how his career was at Maine and all of that. A lot of interesting stuff from him, both on Dak, DeShaun Watson, talking about this Houston roster that he's now trying to kind of put together and provide depth. You brought up the fact, Ed, this is a real makeshift offensive line. 17 sacks, is that right, for DeShaun Watson through 4 games?
Yeah, 17 sacks. Buffalo's allowed 21. That's the only team that's allowed their quarterback to be sacked more often.
Yeah, and
DeShaun Watson's been sacked to this point.
And part of that is the quarterback likes to run around. He does hold the ball at times, and so he can sometimes we always think of these mobile quarterbacks as, oh, they don't get sacked. Well, no, a lot of times they get sacked a ton. The guys that, in his, Favre got sacked a million times because he was moving around back there. Steve Young got sacked a million times. But they're starting a rookie at left tackle. That's not what they wanted to do coming into this season. I think his name is Martinez Rankin, who they have over at left tackle. You mentioned Kendall Lamb's having to be over there playing right tackle. They are just kind of beat up. But if they do give their quarterback time, Ed, you brought it up. This is, especially adding this Kiki QT, from Tech, us Big 12 fans, we watch this guy terrorize defenses, and he does have incredible speed. I didn't know he had the hands. I don't recall him having the hands that he showed in this first game he played in. 11 catches for over 100 yards. Ed, this is I don't think the Cowboys secondary will have been challenged like what's about to happen on Sunday night.
Well, you've got, first of all, a mobile quarterback in DeShaun Watson who ranks among the best in the league in terms of efficiency outside the pocket. So that creates one unique challenge for the Cowboy defense. And then if you just look at the fact that they rank 5th in the NFL in explosive plays, that's runs over 15 and passes over 20, that only the Chargers, the Broncos, the Rams, and the Saints have more, I think that gives you a real sense of what it is that the Cowboys have to deal with. And then there's the fact that they're not really familiar with this, particular opponent. So this is a game to me that the Cowboys defensive front should go into the game expecting to dominate, and really, because of all these other threats we've talked about, that's really, to me, where they need to win this game.
Yeah, and maybe this is the game we find out. It still feels a little bit like a mirage, although that's probably unfair of me, that Byron Jones, Cowboys cornerback, one of the top-ranked cornerbacks according to Pro Football Focus, and teams are apparently not even really throwing at him. I say apparently, that's what the stats show, and that's what the game film shows. They're not even throwing to his side, but I don't feel like DeShaun Watson is going to shy away from any cornerback in this game, so we'll see if Byron Jones can continue to have that type of play. And at some point, Ed, we've talked about it, it'd be really good for this defense to get a takeaway. Now, real quick, let's talk about the Cowboys offense a little bit and some of the silliness that's going on this week.
Let me make one point about what you just said about the takeaway.
Please do, Ed.
Like, we know that the Cowboys have, as we've stated, one of the dominant pass rushes in the league, and DeMarcus Lawrence has now proven over time to be one of the best individual players in that regard, creating pressure on the quarterback. The Cowboys somehow are the only team in the NFL that has 0 interceptions to this point, and they have just 2 takeaways, the fewest in the NFL, and they need to contribute in that way for an offense that I don't think is capable of consistently going 75 or 80 yards on drives. They just don't have that explosive element in their own offense. So that's an area I think that the Cowboys have got to look to really improve on going forward if they're going to have success.
I absolutely agree with that. And Ed, what I was going to tell you is that this story this week, and I wrote something about this yesterday, and the Morning News said, well, we need to flesh this out before you come out off the top rope. I love Terrence Williams. I watched him at Baylor. He helped beat OU and had a historical catch to beat OU. I think the same season he had huge catches against TCU in a game when he played with RG3. So, I have always hope, this guy would have a successful NFL career. And to this point, he has had somewhat of a successful career. Taken by the Cowboys, is he a second-round pick? And this week, though, in the aftermath of is he going to be suspended? Is he not? For this public intoxication arrest this past offseason, he's not been a part of the offense this season, not a huge part of the game plan. In fact, he's just not been out there for a whole lot of snaps. We don't know the explanation. And then this week, Ed, nobody really is saying anything. Jason Garrett says we know he's not practicing. It's for non-injury reasons, and Jason Garrett will only sort of allude to these sort of off-the-field issues that he's having. Ed, personal issues. Can you make any sense?
An agreement that he should be missing work for whatever it is he's doing.
Yeah,
this does not impact his future, which I find hard to believe. He's played the fewest snaps of his career on a percentage basis. He's a former starting player who barely gets on the field now. When he does, they never throw him the football anymore. And now he's got some personal problems that are keeping him away from work for nearly a week now. He wasn't there last Friday. He was inactive for the game last week, and now obviously his preparation for this week is being affected to the point that it's hard to imagine he's going to be a part of this game plan. And maybe he's not going to be on the roster because they've got David Irving coming eligible, and they're short at defensive tackle. And so if they decide to go ahead and activate him, they need a roster spot. They've got too many receivers relative to the 53. I think they have 7 receivers on their 53-man roster. So maybe at the end of the week it's farewell to Terrence Williams.
Yeah, it could be. And then, by the way, the rest of that statement, they've got too many receivers who can't play. If obviously you have Cole Beasley. Michael Gallup seems like he's coming on a little bit, but when we talk about the Texans receivers, boy, it's just a whole different class of receiver. Did you hear that, Ed? That little subtle thing from Brian Gaine, and he wasn't taking a poke. I'm the one taking the poke. They drafted 2 tight ends. Jordan Akins and Jordan Thomas. Jordan Thomas, I believe, is the one from Mississippi State that's 6'6", and then you have Jordan Akins, the guy from Central Florida. They're both getting involved, and they're both making catches. One guy, the big tall guy, Jordan Thomas, raced down the sideline, I believe it was in the last game, for 40 yards. So, Cowboys draft a tight end out of Stanford in the 4th round, and the guy can't even get on the field. And
I thought you were talking about Rico Gathers here. I thought you were about Rico Gathers again.
No, that's a gadget player that they put in the red zone and then throw it way over his head.
I thought he was a big rebounder, leaper guy, go up and get it. I think Jimmy Graham would have had that 10 times out of 10.
That was pretty high. That was pretty high. He's not and that's the thing. He's not like he doesn't have the greatest athleticism ever. He's just a big old huge guy. But anyway, it is kind of remarkable when you see other teams have some
develop players,
yes.
Get them on the field right away, even if they can't do everything.
Yes.
They give them a chance they figure out a way to take what their best quality is and bring it to the field and have it affect the game. And the teams that are the best in the league are those who excel in player development. And I think that's an area where the Cowboys could use some work.
I am right there with you, Ed. I
was also trying to think of how many times when Brian Gaine was talking to us about his philosophy, and particularly as it pertained to getting out and actually seeing players instead of scouting by TV. How many times did that apply to the approach the general manager in Dallas takes? I think Brian Gaine and Jerry Jones do the job a little bit differently.
Yeah. I had already made my Cowboys joke, and I was thinking about the same thing right there. Although I guess the Cowboys version of Brian Gaine might be Will McClay, if we were going to try to match up who in the organization behaves the most like Brian Gaine, but still, it is a different way to run things. And that's why, when Aikman talks to us, and Aikman has talked to us before about how he has an interest in being involved in personnel at some point and would like to take over a team, like as a team president or a kind of a John Elway type role in a team.
Only with more responsibility, he's always told me. He likes the John Elway model, as long as he has more responsility than what Elway has.
Yeah, that's fine. But, we know it could never happen here, which is just sort of sad because, one of the great legends.
He would have named one of his children Jones, so he would have had a chance.
I wish you would. Just when we're getting close to having Tony on, you always have to take some little poke at him. Golly. By the way, how did you? I'm not even going to get into that. There's someone who was missing from that documentary, someone who was with Romo every step of the way from the time he got off the bus
Brian?
in San Antonio. No, I'm talking about it goes way back with him. So I'm a little bitter about that documentary, but whatever. I may get around to watching it. I only would want to watch the part you were in, just to kind of see how you did if you indeed were featured.
Usually I have a much bigger role. I generally, NFL Films ask me to sit down and do an interview to contribute my observations and insights when they do these documentaries on Cowboys players or former Cowboys players. And they did so with Romo, and I was glad to be involved. And I think I didn't spend an hour and 10 minutes to make one point about the trip to Cabo.
Wait, you're not allowed to complain to me, by the way, someone who spent like every day with Romo and was closer to him than any journalist probably should have been in the first 4 years of his time with the Cowboys.
You were surpassed in that regard by another local scribe.
That's fine. That's fine.
The time he started to play until the end. But
I gladly gave it up.
Somebody on Twitter pointed out they watched it. They really enjoyed the Romo of football life and noted that I made a cameo. And I said, well, I think I should have been on there a little more often than Candace because she was mostly crying and sobbing about his career when she was on the program.
Yes.
And I managed my emotions much better than did his wife.
I was in his life way before Candace. I'll also add that. It is Matt Mosley. It is Ed Werder. It is the Doomsday Podcast, a special Houston Texans, Dallas Cowboys preview. The game is at 7:20 Central, kickoff in Houston. Sunday night football. And, of course, right after the game, we'll be in the studio reacting to it, and then you can listen to it as you drive to work. Or if you want to stay up real late, we'll have it ready for you probably by around midnight. But we'll have the podcast. We'll have Doomsday for you. So, Ed, really appreciate it, and this has been fun. And I thought Brian Gaine was an excellent guest. And I also wanted to say we've got some new sponsors coming on board, and that's exciting. And Ed, I want you to take a peek at mybookie.com. I want you to get ready because they are onboarding, so to speak, with us. And as we record on Sunday night, we will have a new sponsor, and that's very exciting. And I think that's because of the growing audience that we have on the Doomsday Podcast.
Fantastic. Great to see. I notice a lot of interactions now on our Facebook page, the Doomsday Podcast Facebook page.
Yes.
I get a lot of alerts about people having conversations about the topics we discuss on there, and that's great to see that level of participation in that venue.
Yes, it's been a lot of fun. So be listening for us on Monday morning, of course, on our next episode of the Doomsday Podcast. For Ed Werder, for Mark Frito Friedman and the Frito Nation Production Studios, it is Matt Mosley. Good day.